Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And we are here with one of our favorite shows of the year. It is our preseason top 50 prospects countdown. We're going to run through this episode 1 through 50 in its entirety. And this list, as with every list that we have done since we started this show almost 4 years ago to the day, was fun to put together, but very challenging at points. And it reflects that the Orioles have a really deep, talented farm system, starting at the top, which we're going to get to in a minute. But first, I'm going to let Bob give a quick overview, or to our longtime listeners, a reminder of how this list is put together.
Yeah, it's always fun. We each make our own individual top 50, 1 through 50. We put them in a spreadsheet together, and then I line them up. 50 points for number 1, 49 points for number 2. What if I actually just listed all 50 numbers all the way down? And then 50th ranked prospect gets 1 point, and just add up those numbers and see where they land. So I think it's a nice, for patrons, you get to see our 3 individual lists as well as the overall, but I think it's just a nice combination between the 3 of us. And usually I end up liking the overall list better than my own somehow.
And tonight we'll run through the entirety of the list. And along the way, we'll try to cover every player, but some players will probably get a little bit more discussing than others. And we're also going to talk about some broader trends that could play out, like who are breakout candidates, who are some guys that are still on the list but really need big seasons. And where appropriate, we're going to talk a little bit about how our own lists were different from one another. But we'll just dive right in here with the top 10. Number 1 on our countdown should not be a surprise at all, because he is the consensus top prospect, not just in the Orioles farm system, but in all of minor league baseball. And that is Jackson Holliday, who's currently competing to be the starting second baseman with the Orioles right now in spring training. Right behind him at number 2 is the power hitting third baseman, Kobe Mayo, who looks very good in camp after a strong 2023 season. Samuel Basayo checks in third, 19-year-old catcher coming off a big full season debut in 2023. He is followed by Colton Cowser, fourth, Heston Kjerstad, fifth, giving the Orioles a pair of outfielders in the 4 and 5 spots. Then Connor Norby, sixth, followed by outfielders Dylan Beavers and Enrique Bradfield Jr. And then we round out the top 10 with 2 pitchers, left-hander Cade Povitz and right-hander Chase McDermott. Nick, I think that every year we've been doing this show, the Orioles have had a strong top 10. But to me, this is a little bit different in that you've got 2 pitchers in there and just a wide variety of skill sets reflected within that top 10. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is, I don't know. I'd have to go back and compare the other top 10, say if it's the deepest or not. But I mean, you're talking about high-end talent. There's some pretty impressive high-end talents up here. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say potentially 9 of these top 10 you could see in an Orioles uniform by the end of the year. Some of them might be a stretch, but still, you're going to see a lot of these guys become regulars on this Orioles roster. Hopefully an Orioles team that goes pretty deep into the playoffs. You're going to see 2 or 3, maybe even 4 of these guys as regulars on this team. And so it's impressive. You've had a couple of trades between the end of last year's trade deadline and the Corbin Burns deal. You've had some graduations as well last year, a number of guys, but yet this top 10 is still extremely strong and still loaded with guys who are, I mean, not just going to be like average regulars either. I mean, you're talking about guys who are going to be potentially 3-4 WAR players for the Baltimore Orioles this year. I don't think that's a stretch to say at all.
It's hard to believe, especially the past few years, when you got Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, Grayson Rodriguez, these big names that are now major league like contributors, like mainstays for the Orioles after last season. And we just traded Joey Ortiz and DL Hall. And yet I think this is my favorite of the top 10 that we've had since we started doing this, just because that top 5, man, these are 5 potential difference makers, pretty much unanimously 5 top 50 prospects in all of baseball. Jackson Holliday, consensus number 1, 3rd year in a row. Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basayo, two young studs that could be superstars in the majors. Kauser and Kerstad, like, just look at what Kauser's doing in spring training. It's not that he's putting up numbers in spring training; it's just how he's doing it. He looks super impressive. Kerstad, we know what he's capable of, and yeah, even just Norby Beavers, Bradfield, Povich, McDermott. I just love all these guys. I'm really a big fan of everyone here. I think whether it's with the Orioles or with another team, all 10 of these guys are going to be major league players and not just role players either, in my opinion. So, yeah, super happy with this top 10. It's hard to believe that it just keeps getting better and better. I actually do think we've always said this. I feel like every year we're like, oh, we're going to lose half this top 10 or more of this. And then we end up keeping more than we expect to the following season. But I actually do think like the 4 of the top 5 are going to graduate this year. Then next year, it's going to be super interesting to see who really fights for that number 1 spot, or at least number 2. I think Basayo might have number 1 on lock, but yeah, it's just super interesting, and it never fails to excite and entertain.
Yeah, what jumps out at me is that as far as strong top tens go, we had a top 10 at one point for a couple of years that had Adley, Gunnar, and Grayson Rodriguez in it. So there's a very high bar there for what is going to be the best top 10. But I just like that when you look at this list, you've got the consensus top prospects in the game in Jackson Holiday. You've got guys who are going to be legitimate power hitting home run threats at the major league level in Basayo, Mayo, and Kerstad. Kauser's such a well-rounded player. Beavers, I don't think has even come close to hitting his ceiling yet. And then Bradfield represents, I think, for a first in the time we've been doing this show, a guy who ranks this high on the list, whose main skill set revolves around speed, defense, and his ability to get on base. We're not necessarily projecting a lot of power. And then with Povich and McDermott, it's not Rodriguez Hall, but it doesn't have to be that way. And these are two really solid pitchers that I think we're going to see in the major leagues probably before the end of this year.
Yeah. And the other thing that really sticks out, number 3 there, potentially, like Bob said, number 1, a guy who could be in the conversation. He's already actually in the conversation for potentially being the next number 1 overall prospect in baseball. It's an international homegrown prospect by the Baltimore Orioles. That's pretty cool to see. There's a few of them that are going to pop up on this top 50 list, but Basayo has already emerged as kind of one of the top prospects in all the baseball. Not kind of, he is one of the top prospects in all the baseball. That's probably the coolest thing to see, I think, among this top 10.
Yeah, and like you were saying with Povich and McDermott, I think they are both performing really well in spring training. McDermott, we finally got first look at him since he had his back injury, and he was throwing darts out there, 97. We know the stuff he's got, 2 scoreless innings with 2 strikeouts today. Looks fantastic, obviously healthy. And maybe we should have put Andrew Suarez on here. I know he's not really a prospect, but I just wanted to shout out how good he looked for the people listening to this in the moment. But yeah, Povich and McDermott, I think both could potentially see time in the majors this year. McDermott sooner rather than later if he's going to look like that every time out. And Seth Johnson looked pretty good too. So no spoilers for where he's going to land, but those 3 pitchers right there could also see some major league time in 2024.
That's a good segue then into the next part of the list, which is headlined by Seth Johnson at number 11. He's followed by Mac Horvath, the 2023 draftee, at 12. Then you have a fellow 2023 draft pick in right-handed pitcher Jackson Ballmeister coming in, 13th, followed by Judd Fabian, Max Wagner, Luis De Leon, Alex Pham, Hudson Haskin, Justin Armbruster, and Luis Almeida. So an interesting balance of pitchers and position players here. And let's start with Johnson, who right now is in camp with the Orioles. And this is really the first, not the first look, because he did have some time in the minor leagues at the end of last year, but 2024 is going to be the first extended chance we have to see Johnson in this organization. And his first opportunity for extended time in professional baseball in quite some time, as he had Tommy John surgery during the summer of 2022 that cost him most of that season, as well as the bulk of 2023. His stuff has looked really good in Major League camp. I know we talked about it a little bit last week, but Nick, I'll start with you here. Johnson outside the top 10, I think for good reasons that we can get into with the comparisons maybe between him and Povich and McDermott, but it feels like he's probably going to be in the top 10 before too long.
Yeah, I mean, all three of those guys are actually, you look at Baseball America's top 100 list, all three of those guys are on the receiving votes categories as well. You know, a lot of Orioles pitching prospects on that receiving votes category. So Seth Johnson's a fringe top 100 prospect, at least according to one national outlet. I'm just excited to see what he can do in this kind of full healthy season, because he'll be 26 by the end of the year. I think like September is his birthday. So he's going to be 26 by the end of the year, and he's going to start the year in Double A. Probably he's probably going to be Bowie's rotation to start the year. But I mean, we've mentioned this before. He was a shortstop when he was at Campbell, but turned pitcher. Rays drafted him 40th overall in 2019. So smart franchise drafting this new pitcher as a pitcher with the 40th overall pick in the draft. That tells you that this was an impressive pitching prospect. And then 2020 obviously doesn't get to pitch because of the pandemic. He has Tommy John surgery after just 7 outings in 2022. So misses virtually all of 2022 and 2023. Only had like 10 innings last year at the very end of last year. So yes, he's turning 26 and starting the year in Double A most likely, but he has very little mileage on that arm. And he's in a unique situation being on the 40-man roster as well. So I think he could have an interesting trajectory to the big leagues, but I'm just interested to see, like, what does the fastball look like? We know it can get up into the upper 90s. We know it's super hoppy. We know he's got the slider that was looking really good when he was in Tampa Bay before coming over in the trade, or before going down to Tommy John surgery and then coming over in the trade. We know the stuff can be good. I want to see what it looks like now across the full season, and see how he can go. Is he going to be pitching out of Baltimore's bullpen by the end of the year? Because I think he's a pretty good option that he could, because of his unique 40-man status right now.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2024, I've said it a lot recently, whether it's in the Discord, please join if you haven't, linked below. But 2024 is the year of the pitcher as far as what comes with Orioles prospects. I think it's going to be the year of the pitcher and the year of the international guys just like really starting to take over the minor leagues. Because if you look at the top, it's always been hitter heavy. We just went over the top 10, but like I said, 4 or 5 of these guys are going to graduate this year. There's a ton of pitchers coming up behind them. We're going to say a ton of pitchers' names here tonight. And Seth Johnson is maybe the most exciting of all of them, especially the way he shut down the Braves A lineup in his first time out in spring training. Proved to himself that the stuff can play, was touching 98. We know he's got that fantastic slider. I think I heard they were working with him on a splitter. I know they're working on him with adding a couple pitches, just like they are with guys out there. But yeah, I think he's already used one major league option. He's going to use the second one entering this season into the minors. Like we said, he'll probably start in Double A Bowie, but would not be surprised if he's quickly in Triple A Norfolk. And then you need an arm. He's already on the 40-man roster. If the stuff is good, why not give him a shot, see what happens? And then as far as just like building him back up after Tommy John, I'm sure they're going to limit him to some extent. I think he's going to start out as a starter, probably do the 5 and dive thing, maybe 4 or 5 innings each time out. But if he's starting to come close to the limit they want, move him to the bullpen. He could be a weapon down the stretch run for the at least September heading into the postseason. Don't know if he would make the postseason roster, but he's a guy that could potentially be a weapon down the stretch of the season, and really set himself up nicely for 2025.
Anyone who really wants to follow the pitching program this season, the trajectory of some of the prospects that really have a chance to elevate what the Orioles have done throughout their organization, you really should look at this part of the list, because you have Johnson, who we just talked about. Then you have a guy like Baumeister, who comes into what's going to be his professional debut with a lot of potential. And then you have Armbruster, who's knocking on the door of the major leagues. He's our 19th ranked prospect. Alex Pham ranked 17th after his breakout 2023 season. He's probably going to could start the year back at Bowie, but the numbers from last year weren't a promotion in Norfolk. And then you have Luis De Leon, a young left-hander who in my view, he's not there yet, and he's got a long way to go to get there. But the stuff when you look at De Leon is potential top 100 pitcher, just because of how hard he throws from the left side, the possibility to develop 3 pitches. It's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. It might not even happen this year. But if he can just stay healthy and the Orioles can do what they've done with other pitchers, which is find a way to develop a changeup or an alternative to it, he's going to skyrocket.
His stuff is so electric. Finally getting to see him in Delmarva and some close-up video. I wish I could remember the guy on Twitter. He follows the Sally League. I don't know if we call it that anymore, but had some really good video of him and Moises Chase this season. And man, his stuff is good from coming from the left side at his age. And this is a guy who popped up. We barely heard of him coming into 2023, and we do this every week. We do these deep dives. So yeah, talk about the prospects of what an international player can be in the minor league system. It's no better example than Luis De Leon. He's immediately into our top 20, in the middle of it, close to the top 15, and he's the guy that could easily be a pitcher in the top 100 overall in baseball the next year or two as he continues to develop.
And he is one of these unique international signings as well. He signed as a much older international prospect. He was already like 18 years old when he signed just a couple of years ago. He signed
He had
for
to put his cane to the side at that age.
Yeah, I mean, and they gave him a couple of dollars, like $30,000 signing bonus. That's all he got. And now he's one of the top pitching prospects in the organization. He's on our top 30 list, well inside our top 30 here. He's on Baseball America's list. He's on every top 30 list now. He's averaging 95 miles an hour from the left side as like a 19, 20-year-old, averaging 95. He already has that feel for a changeup. He's got a slider in his repertoire. This kid he skyrocketed up. He made national waves last year as an arm to watch in this system. I'm excited to see what he can do this year. Just this whole range. I do agree that, yeah, Seth Johnson is kind of in this second grouping as well, but he may have a higher ceiling than McDermott and Povich. That's completely understandable. I would buy that argument. But while those three guys are fringe top 100 pitching prospects already, Baumeister, we'll see what he's got this year. We didn't get to see him last year after he was drafted out of Florida State. The Orioles didn't let him pitch, but we'll get to see him make his debut this year. I'm excited to see that, of course. De Leon is merged on the national stage. Alex Pham, like this guy was we said this before, he was strictly a relief prospect a year ago when the season started. He made, I think it was the first game of the season or second game of the season. I can't remember, but he got the start for Aberdeen. I'm like, what are we doing with Aberdeen? We're just starting all these relievers. I guess it's early in the year. It's low A, high A, whatever. Like, all right, we'll cycle through and what is this Aberdeen rotation? Turns out Alex Pham struck out almost 37% of batters he faced in high A last year. Yes, he's a little undersized. He's 5'10", 5'11", but at the same time, like he's added new pitches. He's got decent velo. It plays up. He still went to Bowie, and the strikeout rate dipped a little. We've talked numerous times about why that is a lot of times with these guys at AA, but the walk rate dropped noticeably, 12% down to 7% when he got promoted to AA. Guys couldn't hit him at either level. He had a fantastic year. And Justin Armbruster, he's the guy, again, that people overlook. It's always the guys who are going to make the impact this year at the major league level. It's Povich, it's McDermott, it's Seth Johnson, but I'm still going to ride this Justin Armbruster train. John Muley wrote another fantastic piece at the Baltimore Banner the other day, kind of highlighting the fact that it's taken time with this pitching development, but Justin Armbruster could be that first guy that breaks through into the major leagues, and we get to start to see the initial fruits of this labor. He checks a lot of boxes. The underlying data on his stuff, especially the fastball, it's really good. The slider, it's really good. And that's a pitch that I don't think he really had as well when he first entered the system. That's a pitch that's taking leaps and bounds. He's added, 2 new pitches to his repertoire? Yeah, it's this whole range of pitchers right here is where I see you see that first initial big breakout in this system. And there's some other groupings down there too, where I think you've got guys with even higher ceilings down lower, a lot more raw, but guys with even higher ceilings underneath them. So we've said it plenty of times, and I know I'm going to keep saying it. The year of the pitching, I honestly do believe that this is going to be the year of the pitching for the Orioles down on the minor league side of things.
Yeah, talk about Armbruster, who's like, don't forget about me. Comes out and shoves in spring training. Alex Phams, cool to see him get in a game and have some success. Povich has looked good, like I said. Just I know spring training. I keep bringing it up, and it's meaningless ultimately. But it's like the first chance we get to see, or at least see on-field reports of what these guys are doing since the off season. So it's cool to see that. And yeah, I think Armbruster is like, even Keith Law was kind of backtracking when he said at some point early this spring, I saw an article where he had put him somewhere in the top 20 of the Orioles prospects, and looked like his tune had changed a little bit since he called him just an Org guy. And yeah, Alex Pham, man, just what a journey to be able to go from like forgettable reliever in 2022 to like on knocking on the door of the majors as a starting pitcher in 2024. Fantastic stuff. And not to forget about the hitters in this bunch, because I love Mac. I think he could be a big time breakout this year. I think he could be a top 5 guy this time next year. Honestly, I think his upside is that big. If he can just rein everything in, put it together, find a home. He's versatile, can play the infield and the outfield. Judd Fabian, the upside is tremendous. The downside is he could strike out half the time. But at bare minimum, he's going to give you awesome defense in center field and get on base and hit bombs. So just already so many fun guys to watch here, even in the 11 to 20 range.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what we get out of Almeida this year, because an injury really took away a big part of his debut season down in the Dominican Summer League. I know that there were some hopes among Orioles fans last year that Almeida would skip the Dominican Summer League and go straight to the FCL because of his background, having been born in the U.S. and having been developed, having played, a couple years of high school ball in the U.S. Unfortunately, injuries cut into his season last year, but I'm hoping to see more from him. Before we move on from this group, though, I want to get your thoughts from both of you on Max Wagner and Hudson Haskin. Haskin, we know, has an incredibly high floor. He does just a little bit of everything, but last year he had a really difficult time staying on the field because of injuries, was left unprotected by the Orioles leading up to this year's Rule 5 draft. And despite some expectations from national outlets that Haskin would be picked by another team, he ultimately wasn't. So he remains in the Orioles system. And Wagner, in his first full year, put up numbers that I think were solid. But when you look across the season, he was a guy that ran hot and cold a lot during his time between Aberdeen and Bowie, which wasn't entirely unexpected, but still left us with a season I think is hard to draw a lot of conclusions from. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. Max Wagner, I like a lot of the tools he has, and I know he dealt with an injury over the offseason. I'm not sure exactly what his recovery timeline is, if he's already participating in drills. Sorry, I don't know, but I do like the tools there. I think he was a late bloomer in college, so you can forgive him for having his ups and downs. I think the team obviously likes the tools. I think can play second base, third base. I think the defense was a little bit better than advertised, but he's got some power. He can get on base. I just think he's going to need to develop in the system, which has been known to develop hitters. So definitely still a fan of his. It's just not exactly Matt Horvath, where you can just see the complete picture right now. You watch him play one time and it's like, okay, I see what we have here. I think Wagner's going to just take a little more time to develop, which is fine, especially you don't want everyone rushing to the top of the system at the same time. And Hudson Haskin, super solid. I want to say he's like the outfield version of Terran Vavra. He's the guy that super solid player. If he could stay healthy, he's going to give you defense. Well, Vavra maybe not as much, but he's going to give you good defense. He's got a decent, just like got average tools all the way around. Can hit for a little bit of pop, can hit for some average, but he just can't stay healthy. So it's really hard to just settle in there and earn that shot. So I think kind of like with Terran Vavra, eventually Hudson Haskin might have to break in with another team, just because with as many talented guys as this loaded system has, I think you're going to need consistency and stay healthy to really get an opportunity here.
Yeah, Haskins tough for me, to be honest. It's just I think there's just too many signs at this point to kind of telling us how the organization views him. And the biggest sign Haskins is telling us himself that he just can't seem to stay healthy. And this has gone back to since he originally joined the organization. Um, yeah, like I don't know though. Like that's going to be a tough one for me. I need to see him stay healthy first and foremost. To be honest, he's got sneaky power. It does come in spurts, but it is there. He's got speed. He can play defense. He can play all three spots. I figured he'd be the perfect kind of fourth outfield type who by this point we wouldn't have to worry about is Ryan McKenna going to be on this roster or what. He'd be the perfect guy that can play left field at home. He can play center field if you need him to in a pinch. Not in a pinch, like he is solid out there in center field. He'd be a perfect fourth outfield type, but it's just the health. Some of it's kind of like early Austin Hayes freak injury type stuff just because he plays so hard. But other time it's like hamstrings. Wasn't a couple hamstring injuries last year, and then what hip surgery? That scares me a lot, to be honest. That's a lot of big issues last year. So hopefully he stays healthy. But I do like the Max Wagner kind of discussion there, and especially saying with Matt Horvath, he was one of the top power speed guys in the draft last year that the Orioles nailed. Questions about the hit tool, but he's in the right organization to fix that when everything else plays so well. But Max Wagner is definitely a guy who you need to take a step back and let marinate a little bit. We talked before, he was 20-year-old draft eligible sophomore. I mean, he's a guy who like model based teams, he's going to pop on in their models come draft time, which I'm sure is why the Orioles put so much draft capital into him. But cold weather guy from Wisconsin, Green Bay, played in the North Woods League where he was good. Showed some signs, came on very late in Clemson. We all know some of the backstory there with Max Wagner, but this is a guy who's definitely going to take a much longer time to develop. He's got some interesting tools. I kind of mentioned I had him on our top 50 individual countdown for patrons. And I mentioned, he stole like 26 bases last year, which was kind of cool to see. But I think that was kind of an outlier stat, to be honest, because he was down there in Aberdeen where they were kind of run crazy. But a couple of things I do like from Wagner is like he plays decent third base defense. He can play second base for you as well. Kind of be this utility guy. And the power started to come out a little bit more last year, even in Aberdeen. So he walks a lot. He's going to strike out a good bit, but he walks a lot. He's good at getting on base. He's got good athleticism. The power's starting to shine through. We'll kind of see where his development goes this year, but good chance we could see maybe a little breakout if he gets up to Bowie at some point this year. But it was a hamate bone surgery he had this offseason. So I don't know the exact timeline, but I think that was back in like December. So hopefully he should be good to go for the start of the season. I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But definitely a guy you probably want to sit back and just let marinate a little bit longer.
Good call. And speaking of Hammett bone, I always think Nick Markakis when I hear that. And I think don't expect big power numbers in the beginning of the season. I feel like that might take some time. And also, speaking of the Patreon, if you want to hear us go in depth on every single player on this top 50 for 5, 10, 12, 15 minutes each, sign up for Patreon. It's all there. It's all there.
Yeah, with Wagner, just to wrap up this section on the list, I agree with both of you. I think the tools are really interesting. I like the defense at third base from what I have seen of it. Depending on how the recovery from the hamate bone surgery goes, and I think Bob makes a fair point, we can't expect the power to come back right away. The biggest thing that I want to see with him is I want those walks to get back up. He had a good walk rate at Aberdeen last year, but then when he got promoted to Bowie, 119 plate appearances, walked just under 6% of the time, while striking out a little bit over 28%. He's going to strike out probably 25% of the time, which is fine with his power, but the walk total has got to get back up there. If he can do that and the power starts to come along later, I'll feel like he's on the right trajectory. And speaking of trajectory, we're going to talk about that a lot more in the later part of this list. But first, we got a word from our new sponsor, actually a returning sponsor we're happy to have back here on the show.
Yeah, if you need some merch, you need a new t-shirt, this baseball season's getting underway. You want a cool, creative, not just the basic Orioles shirt, you want something cool, check out Birdland Sports, birdlandsports.com. They got some stuff for you. I've ordered plenty of shirts from them, and actually just looking here now, let me pull this up uh, on the screen here. You get the Birdland shirt here in the Friend style. I thought that was pretty cool, a little bit different. And you also have, as I bring up another screen here, another one that's kind of interesting and in the moment. It's the Birdland Liftoff era, stealing from the Taylor Swift tour stuff. I thought that was pretty cool. I might have to get that one and surprise my daughter. She would get a laugh out of that. It's totally worth $30 just to do that. But yeah, these are cool shirts, and there's plenty of other ones there. We'll go through them the rest of this month. They're going to be a sponsor for the whole month, so check them out. And yeah, order yourself a shirt. Represent Birdland out there when you're just going about your weekend, when you're at work. Birdland Sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to check them out. We'll now head into the 21st through 30th ranked prospects on our list. And if you're looking for players that have been signed as part of the Orioles' recent international classes that either are on the radar or are about to possibly raise their stocks by a good bit this year, this is the right part of the list. And it's also got some interesting pitching prospects in it. Ranked 21st is a recent guest on the show, infielder Frederick Ben Cosme. He is followed by right-handed pitcher Trey Sprite, then outfielder Braylon Tavera, who comes in 23rd. A longtime favorite of the show, right-hander Gene Pinto, places 24th, followed by infielder Leandro Arias at the 25th spot. Kiefer Lord, a 2023 draftee, checks in at number 26, followed by fellow right-handed pitcher Carter Baumler. Creed Willems, 28th, the power-hitting catcher who spent last year at Delmarva and Aberdeen. He then is followed by Jake Cunningham, a toolsy outfielder selected by the Orioles in last year's draft, and then right-handed pitcher Juan Nunez, who was part of the return from the Jorge Lopez trade with the Twins in July of 2022 and showed a lot of promise in his full season debut with the Orioles last year. And to this point, we haven't discussed the differences in our individual lists a lot because there really haven't been much. It might be a guy places 12th on one list, 14th on another, and 11th on the other. That's not really a big thing. But, Nick, I want to start with you here because you had Trey Sprite inside your top 20. You had him up at 17 ahead of Luis De Leon, ahead of Justin Armbruster, ahead of Alex Pham. So, a lot of guys that we've given real praise to. What jumps out at you about Bright?
I like this arm a lot. I'm not gonna lie. This is a guy who he's built like a starter, and I know right after the draft, when he was taken out of Auburn, I know he was one of the guys kind of tabbed as he could potentially move pretty quickly through the system. You put him in a bullpen role and kind of watch him fly up the system, but the Orioles aren't going to do that. They're going to turn Alex Pham into a starter. They're going to keep Trace Bright as a starter for as long as possible. Just a big-bodied guy who throws hard. He's got a beautiful curveball. That's probably his second best offering there. And last year when he was in Aberdeen, he started the year in Aberdeen, got a cup of coffee in Double-A to end the year. But my man struck out. Let me get the percentage number here. I don't like the K per 9 number. 35% strikeout rate when he was in Aberdeen last year. 28% with a cup of coffee when he was up in Bowie. 201 average against down in Aberdeen. I called a shot earlier in the preseason. I'll bring it back up again. Just why not? I'm gonna ride this train. I called a shot before the season that Trace Bright could potentially be the Orioles minor league pitcher of the year this year. That was kind of my bold prospect prediction before the year. I could see that still happening, right? It's the walks have been the limiting factor though with Bright. That's the big bugaboo there with him. He had like a 13% walk rate in Aberdeen. It did go down a little bit to 11% in Bowie, but again, that was just like 15, 16 innings or so. But he throws in the mid 90s. Like a lot of these top Orioles pitching prospects, he commands the top of the zone. He owns the top of the zone with that fastball, the plus curveball. Slider and changeup, I think, are two of the newer pitches to his repertoire. And that was, I remember in Baseball America's write up done by, again, John Mioli. He noted that last year was, Bright's first full year as a pro in the organization. And a lot of the time last year, Bright spent was expanding that repertoire, was I think the note that John put in there. So he's learning his new pitch mix. He's learning how to use it in game. And yeah, the highs were high and the lows were low with him. He'd have games where he'd strike out 8, 9, 10 guys, give up no runs, 1 run across 5, 6 innings. And then the next 2 nights, he'd struggle to get out of the second inning, give up 5, 6, 7 runs, walk a bunch of guys, strike out just a couple. I think that's just playing around with your mix a little bit. I wish we really could. We preach all the time. It's process over results down in the minor leagues. And I feel like with Bright, that was the case here a lot of the times. The walks are a big issue. There's no denying that. But I think this was a matter of learning this new pitch mix, figuring out what works in higher levels against competition, and maybe trying to introduce a few new pitches into that pitch mix, and then seeing what worked best for him. And I think it went pretty well. The changeup took a big step forward as the season progressed. That became a swing and miss pitch. If he can lower those this year, I think he's going to take a big step forward. It's just a guy that when I watch him pitch, I love every time he's on the mound. He's must-see TV for me, just because you could watch a real gem of an outing from him.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a good point about, especially with pitchers, I feel like don't look at, the ERA at the end of the season and that's how you decide who the best pitching prospects are, because these guys are going to toy around with stuff, throw stuff that might not even be long term in the arsenal. They just want to see, is this a thing? All right, let's throw it a million times tonight and see what happens. And they get crushed. And it's like, well, throw that one out. There's all kinds of stuff they do, especially in the minor leagues, where it's just you can't. You got to read the scouting report, watch the stuff, actually watch the games a little bit. It helps big time when you're evaluating pitchers. So I'm a fan of Bright as well. Not as high as Nick, but the guy I want to shout out here in this zone is, and I'm just gonna keep the theme going, talking about spring training. Leandro Arias got into a game in Major League Spring Training last week, pinch ran in it. I think he actually got in a bat later in the game. That says a lot to me for someone who hadn't even made their full season debut. To me, maybe this is, look, I liked him before this, but to me, that just speaks confidence. There's a lot of guys down there in minor league camp that could fill that role, especially in the infield. Jalen Vasquez, that I could name 10 people that are, maybe not the prospect that Arias is, but just, hey, we'll bring him over, give him some chance here. The fact that he was brought over and got into the game, I don't know. I have a feeling he's going to be the big breakout guy in Delmarva now, but I was already thinking that anyway. We know Eric Longenhagen of Fangraphs has always been a huge fan of his. Switch hitting shortstop, or at least infielder long term, that can have a good hit tool, surprising pop. And no, I'm not talking about Emilio Sanchez, who was the recent draftee. This is Leandro Arias from a couple of years ago. I think Arias is going to lead guys like Braylon Tavera, Thomas Sosa, who we'll get to them, but I think he's going to lead the way for my other half of the prediction from the beginning of the episode, where it's the international flavor taking over, especially the lower minor leagues.
We always talk about the walk and strikeout numbers being important at the low levels because these are 16, 17-year-old kids who still are not fully grown. You can't expect them to hit for a lot of power. And while the walk to strikeout numbers don't tell us everything, I think they're generally a good indicator of how a hitter is going to develop, because you get a sense of their recognition of the strike zone, their ability to avoid swinging and missing at pitches in the zone, and their ability to lay off the bad pitches. Last year, Arias walked as much as he struck out in the Florida Complex League. Both were an even 12.3% across 162 plate appearances. That says a lot to me. And then you add in the fact that he's a switch hitter who reports on the exit velocity with him have always been really good, plays a couple of different positions. And he's only 19, and he's got the possibility to fill out a little bit more and get stronger. Right now, listed at just 6'1", 155. So there's definite room for development here, and I could see Arias taking a step forward this year.
He just turned 19. Like, 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's going to be a 19-year-old, probably. He'll be in Delmarva's opening day lineup, probably with 20-year-old Anderson De Los Santos and 18, 19, 20-year-old Braylon Tavera. We'll see if Arias is the guy who has like the Freddie Bencosme intro to Delmarva and just takes off like a rocket, or if he has an Anderson De Los Santos type season where it's like he flashed everything, just wasn't able to put it all fully together or not. But I mean, Zach hit the nail on the head with the strikeout to walk ratio. Perfect for him. And you look at some of his other, from the DSL to the FCL numbers, he hit just 217 in the DSL, but he hit 271 in the FCL. The WRC plus went from 88 up to 110 in the FCL. ISO went up from 089 up to 143. Hit 3 home runs in the FCL, hit just 1 in the DSL. So, and he also, those 12.3% strikeout rate and 12.3% walk rate, that was compared to he had a 14.2% walk rate in the DSL. So it went down just a tick, right? But he showed more power, and the strikeout rate dropped from 21.6% down to 12.3%. So he's striking out less, walking about the same, showing more power, and making much more contact. And again, DSL, FCL, so we haven't gotten our eyes on him. These international guys who haven't made their Delmarva debut, we're not hiding out in trees down in Sarasota, so we haven't gotten our eyes on these guys quite yet. All we can do is look at some of the key statistical indicators for some of these guys, and they're popping for Leandro Arias, to be completely honest. And if you read some of the reports from people who have seen him, though, arguably from the national side of things, these are non-Orioles sources from national outlets who have seen Arias and have reports, deeper reports on Arias. Some consider him the top international prospect in the system outside of Sammy Basayo, the guy who could have the biggest career, a guy who could be a starting second baseman. I believe this was Longenhagen as well, who said Arias could be a starting second baseman on a playoff caliber team at the major league level years from now, because he just turned 19, but that's his ceiling. That's what you have to look forward to with a guy like Leandro Arias, which is pretty awesome when you read a lot of stuff like that about him, because he wasn't even the top signing in that year's class. It was Braylon Tavera. Arias got like half the signing bonus. So it's just, he's going to be a really fun follow down there in Delmarva this year.
For the record, 12% is a very good walk rate and an elite strikeout rate. Like that is basically, you don't strike. That's Cesar Prieto. Like you're not striking out. It's pretty awesome.
Talk a little bit about the 2023 draftees in the list, because to me, they're some of the more interesting players coming into this season. In Kiefer Lord, you have a right-hander who, in a span of about 2 years, went from throwing high 80s, low 90s in high school to consistently riding mid to upper 90s in college, and has a lot of the traits that we know the Orioles like in their pitching prospects. And meanwhile, a guy in Jake Cunningham, who Brad Seelick, formerly of the Orioles organization, did an excellent job running their drafts for the years he was with the Orioles, referred to as a tool set. And last year, Cunningham at UNC Charlotte had his season affected by an injury, so we didn't get a chance to really see a full spring from him, and got very little taste of him out of the draft last year. But a lot of the reports nationally on him are pretty high. So, Bob, I know Cunningham's a favorite of yours. Let's start with him. What are your thoughts on him coming into this season?
I love him. I think I put him right up there, just behind Hudson Haskin, right in that John Rhodes range from the past year or so. I have him at 22. Nick has him at 28, and Zach has him all the way down at 44. Such a hater, but but how can you hate the tool shed? I just see, it's not like, again, he didn't start until a little bit later from these draftees, so didn't get a lot of professional detail here. But I think the ceiling is what really is giving me stars in the eyes. I just see a guy that can play all three outfield positions, steal 30, 40 bases, hit 25, 30 home runs if everything clicks and everything goes right and stays healthy. I mean, this is just an uber athlete who, if he focuses on baseball, I feel like the Orioles and him could make some magic happen. And I think he's a guy that could be top 20 on our list, top 15 type next year if everything goes well in 2024. I'm just a really big fan of him and Kiefer Lord. Just to mention him real quick, I think that arm is electric, and I could easily see him shooting up these rankings pretty far as well this year.
Yeah, Kiefer Lord, I just want to see him pitch down there. I think he got one outing and then they shut him down after they drafted him. But I mean, when the man teaches himself like 10, 15 plus miles an hour of velo during COVID, that I think that speaks volumes about what's between the ears there. But with Cunningham, like he's listed at 6'4", 205, and he was considered by many to be one of, if not the most athletic players in the draft last year. The Orioles drafted him in the 5th round. He probably should have went in the 3rd round. I think the injury really caused him to slip a little bit. Like the guy is going to legitimately be, you pan out here, and again, you're looking at like 100 percentile outcome, of course, but Bob hit the nail on the head. It's 20 plus home run potential. It's 30 plus stolen base potential. It's 30 plus doubles. He's going to hit for a pretty decent average and get on base close to 400 on base percentage. Like that's peak Jake Cunningham when you look at him down the line. He hit 1 home run last year when he got to Delmarva. It was an opposite field shot. I mean, the guy is, I think he robbed a home run, if not 2. I remember 1 specifically he robbed when he was in Delmarva. He kind of showed a little bit of everything at the end of last year. So I'm excited to see. He's probably going to start the year. I don't see why they don't go ahead and start him in Aberdeen and see. I'm anxious to see what he can do because he's literally has all the tools. Good eye at the plate. I don't think he's going to strike out a ton either. I mean, this guy is kind of the complete package, and he really was there's some pitchers who could really pop in this draft class that were drafted in some later rounds that I really like that we're not going to talk about tonight. They didn't even crack our top 50. But I think Cunningham could be the guy that you look back, 5-10 years from now, and you're like, man, how did you get him in the 5th round? I genuinely believe that about Jake Cunningham.
Cunningham sort of sits in that territory, just to address the point of why I have him lower than where you guys had him. Cunningham's kind of in that territory where I need to see more. I know the reports are really positive, but he's coming off an injury. Didn't have a lot of time in professional ball last year. There were some of the national reports on him. There were questions about the swing and miss game. So I do feel like he is a little raw coming in, and we've seen some ups and downs with guys that have that profile coming into the system, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the list. But I do think that he's someone who is going to shoot up my personal list with a good start to the season and who could really take off. I'm going to shout out one guy that I wanted to highlight before we move into the next section of the list, and that's Juan Nunez. I had Nunez 30th, which is about where you guys had him. And what I was really impressed by in his full season debut is that he went from being a guy that had some interesting traits to now you can start to see a starting pitcher there. The secondaries are behind the fastball. There's no question about that. But you can see possibly a 3 or 4 pitch mix developing where if he pairs them with his fastball, he's someone that I could see at worst being a 5 and dive guy that's really good at the back of your rotation. And what jumps out to me at him when I watch his starts is that when his changeup is on, his arm action is so good on it that I don't think hitters actually pick up the difference in the pitch until it's left his hand. They're swinging a fastball, and it's a changeup that's 4 or 5 miles an hour slower than what the fastball is coming in at. So his ability to change speeds and really keep hitters off balance is something that jumps out at me. And there's still some work there with command, but I think the Orioles have something here.
I mean, what jumped out to me is his 0-6 record last year and his 0-2 record the year before that. So he's 2-12 career record in the minor leagues. So I don't know about that one. This is a good one. I do agree that when you were watching him in Delmarva, he started the year in Delmarva last year, right? Yes. When you were watching him in Delmarva, you see some guys who like they flash things like Juan De Los Santos. I still think flashes some starter traits. Moises Chase flashes some starter traits. But Juan Nunez was the guy when you watched him, you're like, this is a starter, at least coming up through the system. The Orioles are going to continue to work him as a starter. I I think he's. I know a lot of people kind of say this about a lot of starting pitching prospects because it's kind of easy to, but I don't think they really mean it, and it's not true when you look at a lot of guys. But some guys, their repertoire, I think, does fit this mold really perfectly, and I think Nunez's repertoire fits this mold. If Nunez can't get the walks down, or he might be a little undersized, he's another guy who he's listed at 5'11". I don't know if I buy that. Uh, he might be like 5'9", 5'10", maybe. So he's on the shorter side as well. And if he can't get the control down and he can't cut it as a starter once he gets up to AAA level and is on the verge of cracking the major leagues, if he hopefully gets to that point, he throws in the upper 90s. He's got this really impressive slider. He's got the changeup, like you mentioned. I think he's got the repertoire that he could fall back on and be a interesting relief pitcher as well. It's kind of so he's got that to fall back on as well. Where if he gets to Double A this year and is pitching really well, then he could be a guy who I don't know shoots up even faster but is a guy who at some point by the end of next year you're looking at as maybe a guy who could reach the major leagues as a bullpen piece.
Yeah, that Jorge Lopez trade, man, the gift that keeps on giving. Juan Nunez, I will say, seeing him in person was a lot of fun to watch in Aberdeen towards the end of the season. He's definitely probably like 5'10" at the most, but he does have really strong mound presence for a guy who's not 6'2" plus feet. Really thought, he's kind of firm and intimidating up there. It's hard to explain, but when you see it, you know it. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Nunez as well.
I forgot. I got to mention this every time we talk about Juan Nunez, and I didn't. The boy is thick. He is thick in the lower half. That's what makes him stand out so much.
We'll move on now to the next section of our list. Prospects ranked 31st through 40th. At number 31, Kyle Bronovich, who had a brief return to the mound last summer after undergoing Tommy John surgery and is hoping in 2024 to have a full, healthy season. That could put him in the conversation maybe for a big league spot at some point during the year. Following him is one of the big breakouts of 2023 and a guy that I know we're going to spend a few minutes on here, and that's Billy Cook, a utility player who showed an interesting power and speed combination during a strong year at Bowie. He's followed by the young left-handed pitcher Davey Cruz at 33rd. Matthew Etzel, an outfielder with seemingly a little bit of everything to offer, comes in 34th after a strong debut last summer. He is followed by fellow 2023 draft picks Tavian Josenberger, an infielder, outfielder, and then Levi Wells, a right-handed pitcher. Zach Peak, who also returned from the mound after Tommy John surgery last summer, comes in 37th on our list. He is followed by John Rhodes, a toolsy outfielder who endured some ups and downs last season at 38th. Emilio Sanchez, a shortstop signed as part of the Orioles' most recent international free agent class, comes in 39th. And then Anderson De Los Santos, who in 2023 made his full season debut at Delmarva and struggled overall, but showed flashes of what makes him an interesting prospect, stays in our list at number 40. Let's start with Cook, because I know a lot of our listeners really became fans of Billy Cook last year. Cook was drafted by the Orioles in 2021, and if you looked at everything he had done up to this point, even going back to his college career, the profile was he was a guy who ran well, occasionally showed flashes of raw power, and could play just about anywhere, but really struck out too much and didn't have a good enough hit tool to be much more than sort of a speed and defense utility guy. Then all of a sudden last year, the power comes out in full force, and the strikeout and walk numbers actually get better. He didn't sell out and strike out more as he hit for more power. The numbers across the board were just better. And now all of a sudden you're looking at this guy who has such an interesting profile because he can do a little bit of everything. Nick, I'll start with you here. Cook got off to a slow start last year and then flipped the switch somewhere, I think it was around early to mid-May. And then after that was one of the best hitters in this farm system. What do you think was the catalyst behind that? And is that something that is going to be sustainable for him going forward.
He played 16 games in April and hit 103 with a 321 OPS, 18 strikeouts in those 16 games. And then in May, it was 288 with an 885 OPS. And then June, 330 with a 909 OPS. And then he kind of tailed off there at the end. I think the bat just got tired there as the season went along. But he really does do kind of a little bit of everything. I mean, he had 24 home runs last year. 42 total extra base hits, 30 stolen bases. He had 25 the year before. He played first base, second base, left, right, and center, I believe, even. So he didn't play short or third. I think he played a couple innings at third when he was in Aberdeen, but he plays a ton of positions, hits the ball hard, gets on base. Yeah, he strikes out a lot, but he makes it up in so many other ways. I was honestly kind of surprised he never got that call up to AAA, but I'm assuming maybe it was probably just at bats, playing time. It was probably better just to keep him in Bowie's lineup every single day instead of kind of getting not full playing time in Norfolk with that crowded outfield that they had. But the Orioles did send him to the Arizona Fall League this past offseason, where I don't think the numbers were good for him out there, where you kind of expect the offensive numbers to pop a little bit for guys, but I would imagine the Orioles sent him out there with a plan and a mission and said, just work on this. And if the numbers aren't great, who cares? Like, you just need to work on this to prepare you for AAA and potentially the big leagues at some point. But a lot of high praise from guys like Buck Britton, a lot of high praise from his managers in Bowie and coaches down in Bowie. This is a guy who can hit with the best of them, who looks like a major league hitter. So I'm anxious, I'll say, to see what he does in AAA. We'll see how much of that power continues to shine at Harbor Park. I'm sure he'll still be a threat on the base paths. I think the biggest question for me is just, is he going to make enough contact now that he's facing AAA pitching? That's the big question, the big thing that I'm looking for this year.
Yeah, I love Billy Cook. It was easy to see. If you take out April, May on, he batted 275 with the 849 OPS, 129 WRC plus, 24 home runs, all 24 of them, 27 stolen bases, 8.3% walk rate, so about average, 24% strikeout rate. Not terrible. I with some pop. He's got an ugly swing, but like Hudson Haskin, he can make it work. But unlike Hudson Haskin, he's pretty consistent and available to play. He's been pretty healthy, and he's versatile too. He can play infield, outfield. I think he's like going to be the perfect super utility player at some point in his career. Again, you never know if it's going to be with the Orioles or someone else, just because there's so many talented young guys in the system. But I think he's a major leaguer for sure. Role player, most likely, but someone that can give you some pop, can give you some defense. He's got a really strong arm. He just does a lot of things well. And, you need guys that can do a lot of things well. Baseball.
Yeah, he certainly does have an interesting profile. And I think the thing that I want to see going into this year is, does that power spike sustain itself? Because if it does at AAA, you're now looking at the kind of player I don't feel like comes around very often, which is can play all over the outfield, can play the right side of the infield, has speed to steal 30 bases easily, and really good raw power. So I want to see how the power translates if it does at AAA level, but no doubt he's put himself firmly in the conversation among prospects in a very deep organization. As I look at the rest of this list, the guy that I kind of want to highlight here is Etzel, because after last year's draft, there was not a lot of attention paid to Etzel necessarily, at least by most outlets. A few were on him early last year. And when he got into the organization, he basically did everything. He hit for power, he hit for average, he played really good outfield defense. He's got a solid arm out there. Nick, I'll go back to you to start with this one. I don't know that any of us saw Etzel as a guy coming out of last year's draft that we'd be sitting here just weeks away from the start of the 2024 season talking about him inside the top 35 of this prospect list. What does that say about how he's really come along in the last year or so and what he could do going forward?
Yeah, I do want to note two pitchers really quickly too, right after we talk about Etzel. But before with Etzel, I think it just kind of matches up with his whole backstory as well. Like he started at what TCU, no Texas A&M. Too many Texas colleges. He started at Texas A&M and was there for like a semester. Didn't even make it to baseball season, right? And then transfers to the JUCO ranks. Goes to JUCO and mashes. Doesn't get drafted. Eventually gets the offer to Southern Miss, but he goes in the MLB draft league and mashed. Was one of the top hitters in the draft league. Didn't get drafted. Mashed in JUCO, doesn't get drafted. Goes to Southern Miss and finally has a real breakout year for Southern Miss, who's one of the top collegiate baseball programs in the country. At least for a while there, they were a top 25 program. But like this is a guy who stepped in immediately into a top 25 program and performed extremely well at Southern Miss, and then finally gets drafted by the Orioles. And again, same kind of thing. We were like, okay, cool. Like we'll see what he does. 10th round pick. Okay, like all right, let's see what he does. And he hit home runs. He stole bases. He hit for a high average. He didn't strike out that much, and he walked a ton. But I think even when he was at Southern Miss, I know he said that he considered himself more of like a slappy type hitter. And he really put an emphasis on changing his mechanics, driving the ball in the air more, which led to more home runs at Southern Miss. And that's continued here in the big leagues. And I know he has said his goal this offseason was to add more power and continue to see that home run total climb next year as a pro. And I mentioned this when I did him on the top 50 countdown. Don't be shocked if the first month of the season, when he's probably going to be the starting center fielder or out or right field or one of the outfield spots for Aberdeen. Don't be shocked if maybe he's a lot better than this and he's going to prove me wrong here, but don't be shocked if the first month of the year you look at his stats and you're like, he kind of sucks right now. What is he doing? He's not hitting the ball very well, because I think he's going to continue to tweak that swing, make some changes, continue to drive the ball in the air more to get more home runs. But I think eventually at some point next year, it's all going to start clicking for Etzel. And at the end of next season, when Baseball America puts out all those lists of guys who had the biggest exit velo gains and guys who had all the biggest changes last year in the minor leagues, Etzel's going to be up there, I guarantee you, as a guy who throughout the year, you're going to see his exit velo numbers climb drastically throughout this year. Hopefully, if he put that work in this offseason and achieves those goals that he set for himself, I think that's the kind of year that we're going to see for Etzel. And hopefully he ends the year in Bowie. This is definitely kind of a true sleeper name, I think, in the system to watch.
Yeah, and true center fielder, like can go get it in center field's got speed. I would say after watching him in Aberdeen, he stings the ball. Like good bat to ball skills. You can see he hits the ball hard when he makes contact. I can totally understand if he could just learn to turn on the ball more, get it in the air a little bit more often. Yeah, those home runs are going to come because he puts really good wood to the leather, wood to the leather. And yeah, I think I'm gonna predict we have an episode title in the next year or two called Etzel's Pretzels, and he's going to be the star of the show.
So Nick, who were the two pitchers you wanted to highlight?
But also, Etzel, in his career, going back to his JUCO days, 93 for 104 in stolen base attempts. The kid has speed. I just wanted to throw out the name real quick, Levi Wells, who was here. I'm going to be glued to every start a pitcher from the 2023 draft class makes this year, because like there are just so many intriguing arms. Some high ceiling guys, some high floor guys, but Levi Wells, fourth rounder, last year's draft, didn't pitch, so 2024 will be his debut. But I just go back to a blurb that Jeff Ponce wrote back in October. It was a whole article about 8 2023 draft picks who could make their MLB debut. It's 2023 draft picks who can make their MLB debut in 2024. 2 of the 8 names on that list were
Teddy
Orioles
Sharkey?
pitchers. That's a spoiler alert for later on. But yeah, Levi Wells was the other one on that list. It was Sharkey and Wells. And he said, his quick blurb on Wells was, high octane stuff will help you move quickly, but a competitive organization looking for depth is a perfect recipe for a rapid ascent. Wells has stuff in bunches with a fastball that sits 93 to 95, plus vertical break on the fastball, hard curveball that changes eye levels and plays off the ride on his heater. Command has plagued Wells as a starter, but He's a dark horse candidate to storm through the minors as a reliever. I'm excited to watch him this year for the first time. And the other one, I guess more so also get y'all's opinion if you're still hyped on this guy or cool or lukewarm. But Davy Cruz, I'm just a fan of Davy Cruz. Like I do question how high the ceiling is, but regardless, he's going to be a guy who I watch every single night just because I like watching him pitch. He just turned 20 a month ago, spent all year last year in Delmarva, 3.62 ERA in almost 100 innings. Walk rate still like 12.3%, which is still high, but it was 15% the year before. Strikeout rate went from 21 to 25%. So clearly walks are still an issue, but I mean, he doesn't also have the huge velo either. He's low 90s from the left side, but he's a super lanky kid. If he can put on some weight and add some velo, continue to improve the walk numbers, maybe he takes a leap forward as well this year, hopefully in Aberdeen, but I still think he's a fun guy to watch.
I like Cruz a lot, and the thing that jumped out at me last year was that over the course of the season, the walk numbers are not good. You're right about that, but if you look over the summer months, his command actually got better. I think it was really July and August, or June, July, and August. You saw the walk rate come down considerably, and it's why when we were going through our projected rosters back in January, I said that I would feel comfortable giving him a shot at Aberdeen to start this season if there's room for him there, because the thing that he needed to work on the most last year at Delmarva was the walks, and he developed in the way that you would want him to develop. His ceiling is not as high as Luis De Leon, which is why there's a considerable gap between them on our list right now. But I think he compares nicely with the guy who's in the next part of the list, and that's Juan Rojas. Both are young left-handers with possible starter traits, but Cruz is ahead of Rojas right now, largely because of health and experience. But if you look at his starts, some of his starts last season, especially in the second half, he was making some real strides there. And even if he doesn't have a velo spike, I still see him as a left-hander who's got multiple above average pitches. That at least puts you in the conversation as a big league reliever.
Yeah, I like him a lot too. I don't know. He's still so young, and he's already shown so much improvement. Feels like he's been around a while, just because he was 16 when he signed, and we've seen him a lot. But I think he'll never be this huge stuff guy. But I just feel like he's going to be one of these guys that has like 4 or 5 pitches, knows how to sequence, knows like crafty lefty to a T, soft toss lefty, as the Orioles from the late 2010s were known to come by. But I think I just feel like he's going to continue to hone the command and just be that crafty lefty that knows how to pitch as he gets older. I mean, he's already learned a lot in such a short amount of time. I think that's going to continue. And yeah, I think I'll say between him and Juan Rojas, one of those two will break out semi big and make it to the AAA level and knock on the door.
We'll go down now to the final part of our list, and that is prospects 41 through 50. Coming in 41st is outfielder Steven Martinez, who was one of the Orioles' biggest acquisitions back in January as part of their international free agent class. He is followed by the talented but often inconsistent Carlos Tavera at number 42. Brandon Young, who returned to the mound last year after a shoulder injury and showed flashes of promise, checks in at 43rd on our list. He is followed by outfielder Thomas Sosa, a young player who took a big stride forward last year in the Florida Complex League. Ryan Watson, the Orioles' 2022 minor league pitcher of the year, who had his ups and downs at Norfolk last season, is ranked 45th on our list. He is followed by fellow right-handed pitcher Cameron Weston. Juan Rojas, who we just talked about a moment ago, comes in 47th. He's followed by Teddy Sharkey, a reliever that was part of last year's draft class that some national evaluators believe could move through the minor leagues quickly. Infielder Aaron Estrada comes in 49th. And then at number 50, Elio Prado. Now, I'll just take a moment there to mention that Joey Ortiz was originally in this list when we prepared it earlier in the offseason. He ranked 5th overall. However, we had to update the list after the Corbin Burns trade, and that allowed Prado to go from 51st in our rankings into 50th. So a guy who's worthy of the top 50 but fell just short gets in because of that. We'll go, though, now to just kind of overall thoughts on this list. Bob, I'll start with you with Teddy Sharkey. This is a pitcher that I know a lot of fans are excited to see. He looked good in short glimpses on the mound after the draft last year. Do you think that the profile is there for him to move quickly if the Orioles develop him as a pure reliever, which all signs point to them doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is electric. He's got the mindset, he's got the mound presence, he's got the stuff, he's got it all. I think slam dunk. If not in 2024, he is a major league reliever by 2025. Just so happened to Jaws over the past weekend and couldn't help but think of our guy Teddy Sharkey here. I just think he's going to be ferocious on the mound, and don't let your guard down. He'll strike you out. No, I love the kid.
Yeah. Here's so his final year at Coastal Carolina. Shout out to the Chanticleers. 99th percentile in the NCAA in strikeout rate and whiff rate. And that includes all D1 pitchers who logged at least 45 innings. So that's, I don't know what, like 50,000 pitchers because there's like 1,000 D1 programs now. 98th percentile in fastball velo, 96th to 98th percentile in whiff rate on three different pitches individually. So one of the nation's top relievers, topped out at 97.8 miles per hour in college, 99th percentile slider velo at 89.4 miles per hour, 19 inches of induced vertical break on the fastball. I mean, I'm going to keep going for 20 minutes till you stop me. There's even a note there about this was from a facility in Jersey that I think he trains at. So I guess they have access to college data. I'm just quoting them. So if I'm wrong, don't shoot the messenger. But according to them, Sharkey's stuff plus on his fastball, only Paul Skeens had a better stuff plus on his fastball last year, and he's okay, I guess. Relief prospect maybe for the Pirates, I don't know. But no, he's a fantastic pitcher, and that's impressive. All impressive numbers there from Sharkey. This guy is, I think, there's no Alex Pham 2.0 story here with Sharkey. I think he is strictly 100% a reliever. He has got the mindset for it. He is legitimately a certified psycho, as his coaches call him. I'm excited to see what he can do. We saw a taste of it. He gave us a little bit of personality last year in Delmarva. 8 innings, 4 hits, no runs, 2 walks, 13 strikeouts, a perfect 2 for 2 in save opportunities with Delmarva. The kid's got that mentality for a late inning role. I'm excited to see how high he climbs this year.
I'm just going to nip this in the bud now for anyone listening. Just because Teddy Sharkey projects as a possible closer in the major leagues does not mean he's necessarily going to be the closer wherever he is next year. So don't come to us concerned if he has a 0.9 ERA but only 1 save after the first month of the season. It probably means he just hasn't been on the mound when there's been save opportunities. But I agree with both of you. The stuff is just fits the bill of electric reliever.
Yeah, it's fun. For me, it's kind of hard to put strictly relief prospects on this list, even with us expanding to 50. It's still kind of tough. Although I believe, I had Keegan Gillies 48 on my list. So I did have 2. I had Teddy Sharkey 47 and Gillies 48. But I think both of those guys they're just that good relief prospects that it was hard for me not to put them both on here.
Yeah, and we were in on Felix Bautista before he blew up at the major league level. I don't even know if he made our top 50. I know he was hovering around there. A Nick Vespi type when he was coming up was hovering close by. We don't typically put relievers on, but yeah, Teddy Sharkey had to be on this list, and I think he's probably only going to go up. And if I could just shout out the 2 guys from this section that I'm especially excited about this year, that would be Thomas Sosa, who's getting a lot of love as a breakout guy. We heard from Anthony Villa. He thinks he's the next Ken Griffey Jr. Would love to see it happen. A lot of personality, a lot of fun, a lot of power. Can't wait to watch him and Aaron Estrada as well. I'm still a big believer in Aaron Estrada. He didn't have the best numbers last year in the FCL, but missed some time due to some minor injuries. And while he had some fortuitous luck in 2022 in the DSL, he had extremely bad luck last year in the FCL. His numbers actually from just like walk, strikeout, like everything but BABIP was pretty much the same. So I'm still an Aaron Estrada supporter and excited to see what he can do.
Thomas Sosa had a 104.3 mile per hour, 90th percentile exit velo last year. That's what, just a couple of like less than a mile per hour, about a mile per hour off from like Heston Kjerstad and Colin Cowser. So for reference of how hard Thomas Sosa hits the ball, I want to shout out one guy in this section real quick, and it's Cameron Weston. He's a guy who I just keep getting drawn to because he was really good in Michigan in college. Orioles draft him. He was unbelievable in the Cape Cod League, which I think saw his draft stock rise there. But Orioles take him. Not a whole lot of draft hype when the Orioles selected him, but he pitched well his draft year. I was excited to see what he could do in his first full season last year, but that got delayed because of an injury. I think it was tendonitis or something, like right during spring camp. He developed tendonitis somewhere, I don't know, elbow, shoulder, one of the two, but delayed his season. I think he only had 40 innings. Yeah, 40 innings of work in Aberdeen last year, but he had a 2.68 ERA, a 29% strikeout rate, just a 7% walk rate, and a 57% ground ball rate. Yeah, those numbers were fantastic. And he even said there's an interview where he laid out his repertoire. Since he's joined the Orioles, he now throws a sinker, changeup, cut fastball, sweepy slider that the Orioles taught him since they drafted him, a harder slider, and a forkball, all in his tool belt. That's his repertoire. It's growing. His fastball was at 92, touching 96 in college, and he said his goal this offseason was to add more weight and add more velo. So I am super pumped to see what Cameron Weston looks like next year, and hopefully a full, healthy year for him since they drafted him.
Yeah, if the Funk Master can add some heat, man, we might have a dude on our hands because I think his changeup's one of the best pitches in the Orioles minor leagues, period. So very excited for Cameron Weston in 2024 as well. Year of the pitcher. You heard it here first a while ago and last right now.
I fully agree with Weston. I had him pretty high on my list. I think I had him 39th just because there's enough of a repertoire there for him to become a reliever, even if he's not going to be a big velocity guy. But if the velocity starts to take an upward tick and it doesn't come at the expense of pitches that are further down the repertoire, maybe he's a back end starter. There's just enough range of outcomes, and none of them are bad. And that's something that you can't say about a lot of pitching prospects in baseball. But Weston has, I think, a fairly wide range of outcomes. And on the low end of that, he's a good upper arm or upper part of the organization depth arm who can give you innings out of the bullpen. At the top end of that, he's probably a starter in the major leagues who's going to be settling in as a 4 or a 5. There's a lot there to like in the changeup. I agree with you, Bob. Probably one of the best pitches in this organization. And one of those that stands out with Kyle Branovich's knuckle curveball, or at least Kyle Branovich's knuckle curveball before his Tommy John surgery, where if you're not expecting it or you don't know what it is, it just blows you away the first time he throws it. And it's a little hard to look at and pinpoint exactly what did he just throw. But then you realize that that's the weapon in his arsenal that gets swings and misses, even though he doesn't throw hard or when his other pitches are off. Yeah, I think as I look at this part of the list when we wrap up, just Sosa, I think some of the numbers that Nick rattled off are important to keep in mind, especially because right now listed as 6'1", 180 pounds. He's got a lot of room to grow and really take off. And then Juan Rojas, I think, as I touched on earlier, cutback, his season was really limited by injuries last year. Didn't get on the mound until July. There's a lot of room there for him to develop, but at the time of the Jorge Lopez trade, he looked like the guy in the lower level of the system that could take the big step forward in 2023 because fastball, it was low 90s, but showed signs of a velo spike to go with a slider and a changeup. And hopefully in 2024, he's able to have a full season and tap into that. Before we wrap up tonight, Bob and Nick, any final thoughts on the list as a whole?
Yeah. Actually, we put 50 prospects on this list. 51 if you count Joey Ortiz, RIP. But we didn't even include guys like Silas Arduin. I've heard it pronounced 8 different ways this spring training. Silas, love you. Probably going to be a defense first backup catcher in the majors at some point in his career. He's not on this list. Joshua Lorenzo might be I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to call us out. We need to do better. We should probably be in the trees more. That should be on this list, and it's probably going to be when we look back in like 3 months, he's going to be a big miss. Trey Mago, Ryan Long, Kyle Verbitsky, Moises Chase, all pitchers who deserve to be on this list. Keegan Gillies, again, like we don't know ball. Gillies could be in the big league bullpen this year. Some other relief-only prospects who I think have some big league upside as well. It's like everyone knows the system is deep, but when you're trying to fill out, I think for me, 40 to 50 on this list, you realize just how deep it is. And like, I don't know. I can't be more excited to see what these guys look like this year. It's a brand new year, so I'm excited to see the changes that are made, who rises, unfortunately, who falls, and see how the conversation is about some of these bigger names in 2-3 months.
Yeah, I'll just add even more names because we are that deep. Trenton Craig is a guy who could break out. Yaki Rivera, Dylan Hyde, a lot of the international guys. Lorenzo, we're on him. It's just we want to see him in Delmarva before we really pump him up. But yeah, I have a feeling he's going to be joining the top 50 ranks at some point this season for us. And don't forget, if Colin Burns has a healthy season, man, he's going to just skyrocket through the system in a hurry.
Well said. And we usually do this every year, so we'll bring it back next week. We'll profile, at least for part of the show, the players that got votes from us individually but missed the top 50 as part of our look at the best of the rest. You're not going to want to miss that. Next week, we're planning to record on Tuesday night for those that watch live. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button there. We are also over at Patreon and at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. If you want to get a taste of our Discord community, go ahead and sign up tonight. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.
And don't forget, Colton Cowser can play center field.